The Genuine Article. Discussion and commentary based on articles from JACC.
Hello, I'm Tony DeMaria, the editor of JACC, and I'm here with another issue of The Genuine Article, and I have the opportunity to talk to Barry Marin, who's well known to everyone and comes to us from the Minneapolis Heart Institute, and Dr. Gaetano Tiene, who's a cardiovascular pathologist from Padua. And we're talking about the very interesting question of pre-athletic screening and proscription from participation, which really is a controversial issue at the moment when one looks at the various recommendations, those from Italy, from Europe, and from the United States. So Barry, we might start with you in representing, so to speak, the American view of what ought to constitute pre-athletic screening.
Well, in the United States, as customary practice, we have history and physical screening. This is very similar to that in many other parts of the world. The idea of adding testing to screening, such as with an electrocardiogram, is an idea that comes to us largely from Italy, where this has been practiced for over 25 years. The question is really, in terms of what is the best strategy for screening athletes, is dependent on what society you're talking about, what healthcare system you would like to fit that process into.
Well, the Italians certainly have really gone at this in a very systematic way, mandatory pre-athletic screening by physicians well trained in this. And Dr. Tiene, your experience, the experience in Italy has been quite positive, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I would like to tell you some history of this compulsory pre-participation screening. We were in the 70s. There were a series of tragic events there, and then it was thought to be necessary to introduce a law. They are not simply guidelines. This is a law that is a compulsory. And this was published in '82, this law. And this law includes as obligatory the history, the visit, and the electrocardiogram. And this is the news. The electrocardiogram is compulsory.
And is there evidence that this really produces a benefit?
Absolutely. In 25 years, we were able in the Veneto region to demonstrate a 90% of decline of sudden death in athletes, 90% of decline.
That's quite an amazing statistic, Barry. Doing an electrocardiogram with trained physicians would seem to be pretty effective. Why don't we do it in the States?
Well, there are several reasons. First point to make is, or at least ask the question, is the mortality rate from athletes different here in the United States than it might be in a place like Veneto in Italy? And our data would suggest that these mortality rates are similar, largely because this is a low event rate phenomenon in athletes. There are only, based again on our data, about 75 athletes a year who die of cardiovascular disease in the United States as part of organized competitive sports. So in a low event rate phenomenon, the impact that any particular screening may have may not affect significantly the mortality rate. Having said that, it is not the same thing as suggesting that power would not be added to a screening program with a 12-lead ECG. But with that power, I must add, comes false positivity, which complicates and contaminates a large national screening program.
Sure, and could lead to additional unnecessary testing, perhaps. I guess moving on, Gaetano, there seems to be a difference in how the Europeans approach proscription of athletic participation. There's a much higher rate of proscription in
Yes.
Europe than in the United States. For instance, people who are a genotype positive for long QT. Do you think that's the appropriate approach?
I think that it is quite convincing because we believe that is life-saving. That is not give the eligibility of people with cardiovascular disorder at risk, frequently concealed, unfortunately. Anyway, I think it is absolutely rewarding, the data and the findings and the results we achieved. I must say that mostly these findings are related to the detection of cardiomyopathies, because cardiomyopathy may present with subtle electrocardiographic changes, and they are enough to raise the suspicion. What is instead still a problem is the recognition of coronary artery disease, both congenital and acquired. They still escape, and this is our nightmare at present.
Of course, in the United States, we tend to believe that individuals ought to have the right to choose for themselves. So it's we're a little bit looser with our proscription. We tend to give more latitude. So let me just conclude this then for our audience. Barry, what would you recommend given the conflicting recommendations at the current time that a physician should do in terms of pre-athletic screening?
Well, at this time, we really don't have a choice. We must continue with the customary history and physical screening. The one element that they have in Italy that we don't have, which is critical to developing a mandatory national program, would be this cadre of sports medicine physicians that are dedicated to the examination of the athletes as a full-time proposition.
Or at least as a specialty.
No, as a full-time proposition. That's what they do. And we, in our healthcare system, would have difficulty creating the same thing that they have in Italy. And so I don't like to look at this as a cost issue necessarily, because we are talking about lives, but more as a resource issue. And who would do the examinations? And how would this mandatory system be set up? And what legal and liability issues would be involved within our healthcare system in this society? It's more complicated than it may seem at the beginning.
Yeah, and Dr. Tiene, I guess you would feel that the Italian system remains the best of all possible worlds.
I think that we are able to prove that is effective, our system. So our dream now is that this system will become worldwide and to prevent sudden death in the young people.
This is a conversation clearly to be continued sometime in the future. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Have a question or comment about a CVN story? Send us an email at cvnfeedback@acc.org.